So next thing was we wanted to just talk a little bit about what is Women Ed and what it's all about.
So with that, we just wanted to go back to some of the things that we talked about in November and reminding everybody about the organisation itself, and the idea behind it is to allow women a space where we can get together and be supportive of each other and think about different ways that we can help all of the women in our community and in our network. So the aim of the organisation itself is to connect existing and aspiring women leaders who work in global education, and a little bit more nuanced than that is to empower women in education to have the choice to progress on their leadership journey, whatever that looks like. So whether you're in leadership already, whether you're aspiring to be a leader, whether that's a middle leader, senior leader, or just thinking about the area of education that you lead and thinking about how you want to progress in that particular journey. So whatever it looks like for you, that's our mission, to empower you to be successful in that journey. Women Ed as an organisation has values that we all agree to stand by, and that's one of the things that we're looking to build between our community as well. And one of our aims for this evening is to think about two aspects of those values, and particularly community building and connection. We're quite a new network, and one of the things that we'd like to do is to get to know each other and to get to know you better, and for you to get to know us better as well. So that's one of our aims for this evening.
If we're thinking about also that in terms of community and connection, we want to make sure we're equally available to everyone in the Portugal community. So we just wanted to kind of remind kind of the avenues that you have. Everyone has access to us to kind of seek support and advice with how they can get even more involved in Women Ed. So you've got there the email address, you've got all of the social media channels, and also the option of using WhatsApp in terms of our personal accounts or our group community. And if there's anybody here that wants to join that WhatsApp community, you can kind of first of all contact us through the email, and then we can set that up for you.
Great. So this evening, just to give you a little bit of an overview of what's going to happen, we have four speakers, and each of us are going to speak for 10 minutes. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions after that. But during the evening as well, if you have anything that you want to pop in the chat, please feel free to do that as well. But there will be opportunity for people to come and ask questions live too afterwards. So I'm going to start us off this evening, and I'm really honoured to be the first person to speak in the first Portugal Women Ed conference online. But I'm going to talk a little bit about being your authentic self. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal experience, as well as things I've learned through that, about ways that we can support students and the people that we work with and the people that we lead through that. So I thought a good place to start was to think about what it means to each of us to be authentic. And the image that I've chosen there is a little bit of a reflection of some of the aspects of our lives that all of us probably portray. In that, quite often, if we look in the mirror or other people are looking at us, they see a part of us, but not necessarily the entire person. And sometimes that's intentional and what we choose to go into the world with. And it might look very, very different for each of us, but it's also helpful to think a little bit about what we mean by being authentic. And I think one of the things for me in particular, when I'm thinking about somebody being their authentic self, is this idea that we fully embrace who we are and we're true to ourselves and we're trust in what we're doing and believe in ourselves and the choices that we're making. And I thought that was helpful to just be clear about what I mean by being your authentic self. Now, with that, I thought it might also be helpful for all of us to take a few seconds just to think about all of the different roles that each of us holds. And that could be your role as an educator, your role as a leader, your role as a mother, your role as a daughter, a sister, whatever it is. Just think about all of the different things that you do in your week or even in your day. And with that then, also think about the different aspects of your personality or your character that you bring to each of your roles. And is it that people that look at you and see you doing those things see exactly the same thing in all of those different roles? Or do you bring to the front different aspects of your character. And if the latter's true, it might be because you've chosen to do that. So it may be that when you're talking to your children, you need to approach that in a slightly different way to how you might talk to your students in school. For some people, that's a conscious choice to do at particular moments. For others, and especially people who have protected characteristics, quite often that becomes a way of life. And that was certainly true for me, and still is in lots of different aspects of my own life and my own experience, and that I've chosen to show different parts of my character in different roles that I hold and different spaces that I exist in. And part of my journey that I'll talk to you a little bit about is thinking about how I can bring more of those different things about me to all of the different spaces, rather than feeling that I have to separate them and edit out different parts of my personality depending on what I'm doing. So I thought to help a little bit with that, I'll tell you a little bit about my story, just to help understand how far the editing was and how the journey of being my authentic self has been for me and what I've learned through that. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, if you like. I was born in London in the 70s, and so I've got a few pictures here that show London in the late 70s and early 80s. Now, for most people, if you ask them about London, they'll tell you about the red buses and the first picture there of Piccadilly Circus. And also, if you ask people about London in the 80s, they might think about punk hairstyles and policemen quite often in their uniforms that feature in some of the things that are quite stereotypically London, and red phone boxes. And that was true when I was growing up. You can see Big Ben there in the background as well. But also the images on the right were also true. And those two images are taken in the area that I grew up in London, called Southall, which is in West London. And the top picture is from 1979, and I have some memory of this. Was a protest that took place after somebody was killed by policemen, and that was race related. And the picture at the bottom is the same high street or in the same area, showing people in quite traditional dress. And that was the area that I grew up in. So my life has always been as a Londoner, but also quite heavily influenced by the heritage and the culture that I've grown up in. And because of that, I learned at quite an early age that there were different parts of my life and my culture and my personality that different people needed to see, because that made it easier for people to accept me and for me to be able to fit in. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I could give you many, but I picked a couple. And one of them is a memory from school. And I remember a French lesson in particular. And I remember the teacher asking us to describe what we'd eaten for Sunday lunch. And I decided at that point that it was going to be easier to make it up than to try and explain what my typical weekend looked like, because my typical weekend was very much with my family, who all come from the same heritage background that I do, an Indian background. And weekends involved lots of traditional food. Now, trying to help my French teacher, who was an English woman, understand what that looked like, but also how to say that in French, was going to be quite challenging. So I decided at that point it was just easier to pretend that didn't exist and make something up. The other side of that was the community that I belonged to. It was also not that common for women to go to university and get a really good education. And that was always my ambition. So I was also very conscious in that arena that I needed to play down some of those ambitions. So both of those things were true, which meant that I started to edit bits of who I was out, depending on where I was. And that continued for quite a long time, which meant that in some spaces, you would see different versions of me, which was fine. And I managed, and it made it easy for me to be able to fit in and do whatever I needed to do. But at some point, you start to realize that that doesn't really work, because it means that you can't always be your true self. And one of the turning points for me, and it starts with a small step, was how I became an international teacher. And it was part of the recruitment process and then the job that I had at my first international school. And I went for a job as a chemistry teacher, which is how I started out. And I went through the recruitment process, and the school at the time was looking for either a physics or a chemistry teacher, preferably physics. And I've taught some physics in my life, but actually what made me tick at the time, and the thing that I really enjoyed doing, was teaching chemistry. And I went through the whole recruitment process, And at the end of it, they said, you know, we'd really like you to work for us, but not this year. And that was a turning point for me. It was disappointing, yes, but also what had happened in that is that both of those people had recognized what made me tick. And suddenly I had this idea that actually I didn't entirely need to just fit into the space that existed. There would be a space for me as I was. And that's been quite a long journey. So that's many, many years ago. And there's been various other things like that that happened that made me realize that actually I could bring more parts of my experiences to all of the different things I do, because that made me understand other people better, because I could recognize the bits of things that people didn't want to show others, or that they didn't feel other people would understand. And therefore they stepped sideways and went, it's just easier if I make it okay for other people, rather than thinking about how people can make them feel better about themselves and the world. So with all of that in mind, what can we do? Well, there are a few different things, and it depends on whether you're thinking about how can you be a more authentic version of yourself, or how can we support the students or other people that we work with. So I think some of the things that are true for people that we work with, whether they're students or adults, is noticing what people tell you, but also the actions that people take. Because it's quite easy for people to tell you what they think you want to hear. But you have to look beyond that, and you have to look at the actions that people take and the things that you notice that make people tick, because that tells you something about their authentic self. You also have to learn to actively listen and make sure that you're not trying to fit that person into what you think they are, but actually really listening out for who they're telling you they are. You also need to take what they're telling you and their interpretation of something at face value, because their experiences might be different to yours. Their interpretation of something might also be different. And if that's the way they see it, even if that's not the way it was intended, that's their truth. And we have to accept that and work with that. And I think that works for students as much as it does for adults. And for us ourselves, what we can do to become more authentic is find those brave spaces, I think, and find people that we can open up a little bit to, where we can be a better version of ourselves, or a more real version of ourselves, people who'll be open to understanding the different experiences and using them to understand that you have a richer experience rather than an odd one. And also be open to asking questions and challenging assumptions. So be that 10% braver about who you are and what you expect from other people too. Right? So just take a moment to think about whether there's something that you'd like to do, or there's somebody in your life, whether it's a student or somebody that you know and work with, or a friend or a member of your family, that you think you could listen to differently, or you could ask questions of, or you can be a little bit braver in yourself. Right, thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Over to you, Adele.
I'm on mute. Okay, I'm just sharing my screen. And I'm just going to put it on. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So I wanted to do a presentation on empowering young girls. And I really wanted to focus on this because I work with young teenagers, young tweens and teens all the time. And I suppose I wanted to really, I know around the world, there are young women who are denied education, denied basic rights, you know, and really don't have any sort of empowerment. But I wanted to focus on the young women that we work with, that we teach, that we parent, that we spend time with. How can we influence their lives, and why do we need to? So I suppose the first one is really about looking at why we need to do this. And we really want to create a new generation of young women leaders, and we empower one, and, you know, it's a ripple effect, isn't it? We want to ensure that that social change is happening for the future. You know, the future is female. I really do believe that. Yeah. So how do we instill that empowerment into the young women in our lives? And why are we doing this? Again, we know that looking at the stats, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the statistics, that girls are far more at risk for a lot of mental health issues. Girls tend to also construct their identity in relation to others. So, you know, hence we are the people pleasers. We are the ones really looking outward for that feeling of self-worth and value. Whereas I think for boys, they still experience that, but not to the same extent that we see young girls do. And we want young girls to be able to advocate for themselves as well. You know, we see that again and again. Boys will be the first one to step up and go, yeah, I'll do that. And girls are like, well, I don't know, you know, we don't tend to advocate for ourselves often the way men do. And I got these stats from the National Organisation for Women in the UK and the National Institute of Health, and they're very recent statistics. And they're quite heartbreaking to read. You know, girls are twice as likely to experience anxiety and depression. And again, that is about internalizing these emotions and these feelings of not being good enough. And 92% of girls do not love their bodies. 83% of our young women think that how they look on the outside, what they weigh, is the most important thing about them and the most important thing for them to get validation. So we can also see, and these are some statistics from the States, but they're really, you know, indicative of what is happening around the world. Younger and younger, we see that girls' self-confidence or self-esteem is just plummeting. And even in a short period of time from 2017 to 2023, we see the huge difference. And again here, persistent feelings of sadness. And we see the huge gap between young women and young men. It's on the rise, but it's hugely on the rise with young girls. And we know there are a number of factors to this. You know, we know social media is playing a huge part in this. There are lots of other factors. So how do we, as the women in their lives, really, you know, empower them and really counteract these stats that we're seeing? I suppose the first one is building their self-worth. Also, we really want to support them with their mental health, with understanding what their mental health is, understanding what well-being is, and helping them with their emotional regulation, understanding their emotions, and being able to really speak up about how they are feeling and not internalizing things, and learning to regulate. And then giving them strategies to understand both themselves and the relationships, especially friendships, in their lives. So the first one that we're going to look at is building their self-worth. Now, I wanted to focus more on self-worth rather than self-confidence, because oftentimes confidence is attached to something that we achieve, something that we do, whereas self-worth is inherently how good you believe that you are, you know, your own belief that you are enough just as you are. And I really want to look at things like complimenting the young women in our lives on their effort, not their results. You know, complimenting them on their character traits. I love how kind you were within that moment. I love how empathetic you are when you said this to your friend. So really catching them in those moments so that they place their self-worth on their character strengths, not on how they look, you know, what they weigh, or, you know, what they've achieved. Allowing them to fail is a big one. And we see this again and again. This is a pattern amongst young women, especially, that there's a level of perfectionism, that failing can be really hard for them. And that builds on self-worth when you learn, okay, well, you know what, that was tricky, but I managed it. And not only did I manage it, but I learned from it. Again, asking them leading questions instead of always jumping in, you know, and I see parents do this a lot, and I do this a lot as a counselor. I want to fix, I want to, and it's about allowing them to come up with the answers for themselves and empowering them in that way. Also just trust, you know, and even saying things like, I trust that you are going to make the right decision here, but I'm here if you need me. And they just need to hear that. A sense of meaning, giving them something that is outside of themselves, giving them a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, chores, helping a younger student, team sports, anything where they have to give a part of themselves to something greater than themselves. And again, we focus on always on the efforts rather than the achievements, and the results is a huge one. Another one that we really want to do, and we see time and time again for our young girls, and it is getting younger with you know, mental health issues for young girls especially. We want to make them aware of the daily habits that they need to practice to keep their mental health and their well-being at a really stable level. So sleep, I've drone on about this, you know, but I cannot advocate it enough that their ability to regulate and cope with their emotions can drop by up to 70%, which is absolutely huge. And as a parent, as a teacher, as a you know, a female role model, practice your own coping strategies. You know, I'm really upset right now. I'm just going to step away. I'm just going to take a few breaths so I can come back and be calm in this moment with you. Talking to them about how you handle stress, how you handle anxiety. Just giving them support and information, letting them know that they're not alone. You know, modeling a daily routine, that's really important. And I talk to the young women that I work with, you know, I do affirmations in the mirror every day. You know, I fake it till I make it. I do little meditations. I do these things, not because I always enjoy them, but because I know that they help me so much. And they are in my daily routine, along with working out, along with building that happiness muscle. And again, normalizing how they're feeling. Often the young people come to me and they feel so alone in it all. The young women, oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. And you know, just letting them know that they're not alone and how they're feeling is really normal. Again, helping them with that emotional regulation. We know in the teens and tweens, the emotions are they're just on this roller coaster. They're in between that child and that adult brain. They're moody, they're hormonal, they go from 0 to 100 in a second. And so it's having them understand that, giving them an understanding that that's where they're at, giving them autonomy as a parent, as a teacher, on your terms, but giving them a say, and practicing your own regulation. When they are, you know, in a heightened state, you always want to meet high emotion with calm emotion, acknowledging the emotion. I can see you're really upset right now. Do you need a moment? Okay, do you need some time by yourself? How can I help? Or shall I leave you alone? You know, but always coming in a calm way. And what I also work with them as well, you'll see here, what they can control, what they can't control. So giving them an understanding what's in their circle of control and what is out of their control. Again, giving them strategies on how to understand themselves. Am I okay for time? Sorry, I feel like yeah, okay. Talking to them about their strengths. They are so used to people telling them what they're not doing well. You know, the first thing I do when teens come into me is I do their strengths questionnaire. I look at all the things that they're really, really good at, and avoiding comparison. I would say, especially as parents, you know, these kids are already comparing, these young women are already comparing themselves every day. So if you can avoid comparison, I really would. And discussing about when they have challenging moments. Okay, what would you do differently next time? What do you think you learned from that? Talking to them about self-awareness as well, you know, how do you think you reacted in that moment? Do you think you could have done that a different way? And what you're doing is you're giving that frontal lobe, the part of the brain that's the executive decision making, you're building the neurons there every time you are self-reflecting with them. And I would say one of the most important gifts we can give our young women is self-compassion. Talk to them about what they want in a friendship. What are their characteristics that they bring to a friendship? What do they want from their friends? Do they want loyalty? Do they want trust? Do they want a sense of fun? What are the non-negotiables for them? And also identify, having difficult conversations in their friendships. It's something we're never taught. I feel really upset when you say these things to me. I need you to stop. Teaching them boundary statements. Girls, please leave me out of this, or when you say this, it hurts our friendship. We don't teach them how to deal with conflict in friendship. We don't teach them how to deal with challenges in friendship. Role play that. Role play that as a parent, as an aunt, as a, as a friend. And talk to them about their own maybe challenging behaviors. And I do this sometimes because our tweens and teens can do things like eye rolling and side-eyeing, and they don't have that level of self-awareness. And I will say it in a very gentle way, I just, you rolled your eyes there, and maybe you're not aware, but that can be a bit hard when I'm trying to have a conversation with you. Were you aware that you did that? And that can make me feel a bit uncomfortable. And oftentimes you'll say to them, they're like, I had no idea. So teaching them these skills are really, really important to navigate their own self-worth, to be able to feel empowered within their friendships. Things to remember, I suppose, when we're dealing with tweens and teen girls, it can be quite triggering. It can bring up our own insecurities. It can bring up our own stuff that we went through as teen girls. That feeling of rejection can be really painful, or, so I think watching your own triggers, watching your own reactions, and also taking care of your own mental health as a teacher, as a parent of, when you're working with young women. Praising effort and giving specific examples of character traits you admire in them. I love your kindness. I love your compassion. I love your strength. Teaching them about inspiring women as well. That's really important. We want them to be able to identify with wonderful, powerful young women that are making a difference, and not just focusing on the influencers and on influencers on TikTok. Be curious about their world. Get into their world. Ask them questions about the music that they like. Ask them questions about the TikTok videos that they're into. They meet us in our world all the time. Meet them in theirs. And then a statement that I would advise any teacher, any counselor, anyone who's dealing with young women, just asking the question, do you want my support? Do you need my advice? Or do you just need me to listen in this moment? Okay. And I will leave it there. Any questions, please? Yes, Georgie.
So I was just latching on to what you were saying about self-compassion and not comparing oneself. In a school, certainly in secondary schools, and as we're heading to the end, the comparisons are rife. It's really hard. And, I teach people that struggle with science, with maths, and it's really hard for them not to just walk into the room and think, this is a time when I just have to survive because I know I'm bad, as opposed to, what can I get out of this? How is this, and discouraging, saying it doesn't matter It's really, really difficult. And I'm just wondering if you had any advice for me, you know, on the front lines there.
Yeah.
Things that maybe
Great
things
question.
that I say to help discourage that, looking around and seeing how this person's doing and how that person's doing, and thinking more about themselves and what their strengths are.
I love that. I love this question. What I do with the young people that come into me is I talk about the different types of intelligence. You know, I was never academically intelligent, but I'm really emotionally intelligent. I'm really socially intelligent. And so when they are struggling in those subjects, you can say, I know how socially intelligent you are, and I'd love you to help me with organizing the groups that we're going to do this experiment in. I love how emotionally intelligent you are. I know there's a student that's having a bit of a tough time. Could you reach out to them, giving them a sense of purpose even within the classroom setting, and praising effort. I know this isn't easy for you, but you are showing up here every week and you are giving it your all, and I really admire that about you. The biggest thing any young girl wants to do is to be seen, to be know that they're valued and that they are enough. Even if their grades aren't matching that, they're getting that feedback, that positive feedback from the teacher. It's really important. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah. Any other questions? Have I gone? Okay, I'll stop sharing. And I'm handing it over to
Me. So I'm here. I've signed up to talk about the maternity returning toolkit. And this is something that I wish that somebody had done for me 5 or 6 years ago. And something that I thought would be relevant to all of us women in education, building this supportive community around the people that we care for and the people that we work with. So strategies for women who've returned to working at school as a mother, and people that care for people returning to school as a mother. And so I just thought I've got way too many slides. I've got way too much content. So as a little experiment, if you've got your phone with you, if you could have a go at this poll, I thought we'd find out for 2 minutes who is here, and you know, who we're sharing our time with here. So it should come up with a little poll, hopefully. How do you feel when you walk into work in the morning is the first question. So if you go onto that QR code, I'm hoping that you can type a word into there. Yes, inspired, great, determined, good, sense of purpose, happy, great. And that's what I'm hoping for. And, you know, when we walk into work in the morning, it's just as Dina was saying, we're kind of putting a different hat on and showing a different side. And I hope that I was really inspired by that, thinking about your authentic self. And I hope that we're all still bringing all of the different parts of ourselves into work. And I know it's the place that I work at now, I feel that so much more than other places that I have worked, that I can be myself and I can start unpacking what that is. And that's why I feel empowered to share the journey to sort of get there and how to help other people get there. It's great. You feel everyone around you. Great. Okay. So I've got another question for you. Why are you interested in this discussion, or are you interested in this discussion? And you can hopefully vote on that now. So I'm here because I returned from maternity leave a long time ago, and in various different ways and shapes and forms. I had my first child 6 years ago, and my second a couple of years, 3 years ago. And so I'm just wondering who's out there, and hopefully that question on your mobile phones has changed. So that you can have a think about this. So we've got a lot of people who've returned from maternity leave a while ago, a lot of people managing and working with people on maternity leave. So we've got about 2/3. Okay, so that hasn't helped me narrow down my slides, but that's okay. It's good to know who's here. And oh dear, please ask me later. And just wondering if anyone has any issues with catering for maternity returners, or any issues that they've had, because we've got a lot of maternity returners, any issues that they had when coming back into school. And I'm just going to write comparison because, you know, what Dina was saying resonated in that way. Comparison with other people was kind of an issue that I had, especially working with my husband and working with other people that hadn't had children. Keeping track on all the workplace changes, exactly. And hopefully we're going to unpack that a little bit, but it does change, and your workplace changes and you change yourself when you've been away for a while. So we've got to be mindful of that. The guilt, exactly. We carry that mum guilt around with us all the time, and you have different strengths to when you had before you were a maternity returner, and you sometimes feel guilty about changing your priorities. And yeah, the energy levels, I mean, there's all sorts of different situations that drain our energy levels, but there's nothing quite being a mother and having to split yourself in so many ways. And the drain is a lot, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, I love all of them. Good to know. Thanks, everyone. So, so it seems like we've got maternity returners, we've got managers of maternity returners. And I think that we're all kind of feeling like this is important anyway, but I just thought I'd share a few statistics, if you need to sort of sell this idea that a maternity returner toolkit is something necessary. Sharing a few statistics here. So I was looking into how many women these days are actually having children. Loads. And contrary to what I was expecting, more women are having children, and women are having children later in life. And so that has implications for your energy levels, for your physical return to health. And in general, women are, and this is how the OECD quoted this, overrepresented, i.e. there are more women than men in schools, which I'm sure we knew already. But I was surprised that the OECD, which Portugal is an OECD country, quotes that 70% of teachers of all education levels combined were women. And so that's even more in secondary and even more in primary, where the figures are even higher. So there's lots of women in schools. Lots of women are having children. And so it is something that we need to think about. The majority of the people that we work with are going to be experiencing, or close to somebody experiencing, these issues. And of those people that do have children, most of them will have some sort of physical or mental implication of having a child. And so that's something that we need to deal with. And although schools have very high proportions of female workers and mothers, they have a very low proportion of flexible workers relative to other workplaces. And flexible working is one part of my maternity returner toolkit to be explored between the maternity worker and the maternity returner and the workplace. And I think it is a very useful tool to help ease that transition back into the working environment. And it's something that is a really difficult ask of a school. And so unpacking that, I think, is a good idea for us. So here is my toolkit. It has 3 parts. We want to try and build a supportive professional community between the school and the maternity returner. We want to explore flexible working arrangements, and we want to provide health and well-being support, or access to health and well-being support for the maternity returner. And so as a manager of people returning from maternity, that's the 3 kind of key things that I would have found very helpful. And ideally preparing that with the person before they go on maternity leave, and saying that this will be in place for when you come back, or we'll explore these options and what your rights and responsibilities and what the logistics of that are I think would be really, really helpful. And so this is my kind of ideas on how we could do this as managers of people returning from maternity. And one idea is to establish a community of working parents, and that's what we're trying to do here. So I've got a WhatsApp group that I've created called Maternity Returners. So far, I am the only maternity returner in that WhatsApp group, but it's there, and perhaps we can grow that together. There's the QR code to join that WhatsApp group. The second idea is to consider flexible work arrangements. And I've put in the references list and some links here. If you do manage maternity returners, or if you're sharing these slides with somebody returning from maternity leave, there's a code of practice around flexible working arrangements and an advice for how that could be implemented. And there's a few links for suggestions from HR executives who worked with schools about how to make that more accessible and about your rights and responsibilities. In a nutshell, in most countries, the employer does not have a legal responsibility to provide flexible work arrangements, but they have a legal responsibility to discuss the possibility with you. And the law is shifting towards promoting more of those discussions. And so that's an important part of this whole process, having discussions based around that. How could that work? And trying to think about the fact that schools are small businesses, and so making those arrangements can be really difficult for schools. As we're managing maternity returners, it might be useful to consider returning to work interviews. And the NCT, the National Childcare Trust in the UK, suggests bi-weekly check-ins, which is way more than we would normally have. You know, I had my mid-year review, I sit with my colleagues, but in terms of a conversation that's specifically saying, how's it going? How do you feel now at this point, at this point? Because it's a steep ramp up when you come back to work after a long time away. I think bi-weekly might be a bit optimistic, but a few check-ins with the people returning from maternity leave as to how that's going would probably be very beneficial, and to make sure that everything's going well. And then access to physical and mental support that's specifically based on the postnatal body and the postnatal mind, I think would be really, really helpful. And that's where the majority of the slides that I have are. So I've got a discussion around this supportive professional community and my WhatsApp group. I've got some advice on flexible work arrangements if people need that, and some links here. But the majority of this presentation, the majority of the material I have here is based all around the health and well-being support side of things. And there's 4 kind of sections of that. There's 4 phases of that. And the first and the most important thing is learn about your core and pelvic floor before it's too late. All of us, whether we've had a baby or not. Obviously, giving birth is pretty arduous on your pelvic floor, but all of us should learn about our pelvic floor before it's too late. Pelvic floor dysfunction is common. It's not normal, and it isn't an end point. And I think I've suffered from pelvic floor dysfunction, and I've healed my pelvic floor dysfunction. And as I was going through the healing process, at some point I noticed that the nappy section for grown-ups incontinent is about 5 times the size of the nappy section for kids. And that's when it hit home how common it is to have pelvic floor dysfunction in men and women. But we need to learn about it before it's too late. And we need to, as a community of women, be talking about our pelvic floors and checking in on them every day. So once you've got that knowledge, once you're armed with knowledge about where the different bits are and how to use them, we need to build in regular deep core and pelvic floor exercise routines. And you may already have your exercise routines that you build in every day. And you might have activities that you do throughout the day, but I've got a few tips on those for those who don't or who want to ramp it up to the next level. So a regular deep core and pelvic floor exercise routine that fits into your weekly schedule and is convenient for you, but also my number 3 here, daily pelvic floor practice and awareness, little tiny nuggets of exercise that you can do in your classroom while you're sitting at your computer. Exam invigilation is a great time for a few Kegels. It can take seconds, it can be difficult, and it can be embarrassing, but most of the time, nobody knows that you're doing it, and it's going to make a massive, massive difference to your overall core, deep core and pelvic floor health. So remembering to do it is a thing, but we've got tips for that as well. So that's a very physical side of things. And obviously the mind and the body all interlink with each other. So you need to prioritize your mental health. And parents are torn in so many directions. We're racked with guilt. And it was really helpful that somebody pointed that out, the guilt, not only of letting your children down by coming to work, which you are not, but that's how it feels, but also the guilt of letting your colleagues down by having to be here and there and looking after your kids and spreading yourself thinly. Most of us are constantly racked with guilt as women and especially as mothers. So learning to organize your feelings before those little niggles become big monsters is really important, and something that I have a little bit of personal experience with as well. So on those 4 different kind of sections, if you will, learning about your pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor is this band of muscles that keeps all your organs in. And we have, we're in the privileged position of having a big hole through which our organs could potentially fall. And not necessarily a big hole. And our pelvic floor is keeping it all in there. But after giving birth or after time, after getting old, after any kind of injury, any instability, if you have a sport that you do repetitively on one side, like golf, cycling, after these sports or giving birth, our muscles and fascia can change. And that means that if you have muscles that are working on one side more than the other, Kegel exercises might be inefficient or insufficient. And in my case, because I had some damage to the muscles and to the fascia around my vagina and my vulvar area, the Kegel exercises were actually causing more problems than they were solving. And so our maternity, I think it's important that all maternity returners are being aware of that, trying to figure out if they have got any fascia damage or if they've got any discrepancies on one side or the other of their muscles, and making sure that their Kegels are effective before they just keep pounding away at the Kegels and potentially causing themselves even more problems. And so I've put a link to a pelvic floor physiotherapist in the area there. Pelvic floor physiotherapists get kind of elbow deep in helping you, and they release tension. They check that your muscles are working. They will put their fingers inside and check that everything is squeezing in the same way on both sides. And they're very, very reassuring about specific exercises that you can do if there are problems there. If you'd prefer to take the personal approach, I've put a link to a blog post here. It's blocked at St. Julian's, but when you get home, you can take a mirror out and look at what you're dealing with a group of people who've all suffered from pelvic floor dysfunction and have developed a kind of online toolkit. It's called Pop Uplift, and it's an uplifting resource. So thinking about all the positives. And this is a particular post called The Private's Investigator. I don't know how many times you've sat legs akimbo a mirror, but it doesn't happen very often for me. But it is important to do, and it's important to get to know all the different bits of our body. And so that was a useful post, and it has lots of pictures of different vulva, different bits in different ways. They've got one bit where they talk about the flap of skin that goes over the clitoris, and they describe it as the clitoris's little hoodie, which I quite liked. And so that's a fun little interesting post, and I found it quite reassuring, comparing all different types of all different shapes and sizes of women's bits, basically. And if you do think that you might have some pelvic floor dysfunction, there are online courses that I found invaluable to reactivate your deep core and your pelvic floor, and to learn about these different parts of the body and how one interacts with the other. And so there's a link to that there as well. This toolkit is full of links for different people at different places to use. And that's the idea here. In terms of a regular deep core and pelvic floor exercise routine, my tip is to choose a time and a place and stick to it. And online videos can work really well. You know how long they're going for. I had a lot of training in a technique called hyperpressive training, which involves breathing all the air out and making an apnea, and then using your deep core muscles to sort of suck everything in. And if we have enough interest, I'm super happy to take people through the deep core and pelvic floor routine I do every week. And that could be something that we explore on the WhatsApp group. Maybe we could all head down to Carcavelos Beach and have a little deep core pelvic floor session. And I've also put a link to my hyperpressive coach here. Her name's Kirsty Victoria, and she works online, and she was a really fantastic help to me as I tried to get my core back after being misshapen by multiple pregnancies. And just a little bit of background there, the main problem that I had was I had a cesarean and then a vaginal birth. And a lot of the healing that I did was to do with the misshapen fascia after my cesarean. And I didn't do any of that healing until 3 years after I'd given birth. In fact, more than 3 years after. So it is, if you're thinking that I returned from maternity years and years and years ago, and perhaps this, it's all a bit late for me, that's not the case. There's still a lot that we can do. And most of my healing happened a long time after the actual physical processes of birth. And then daily pelvic floor practice and implementing that. So as I said, it is quite easy to forget to do these things. There's a fantastic NHS app called Squeezy, which has a timer and it sends you notifications about doing that. So I found that really, really useful. It has a little timer for fast contraction and slow contractions. And I bought a pelvic floor trainer. I didn't know these things existed, but it's a thing called a PeriFit. There are other brands out there, and it physically checks that you're squeezing the right parts of your pelvic floor. And it makes a little game out of it, which is quite fun. It's like Flappy Birds on your phone. So I'd recommend investing in a pelvic floor trainer. And then the last section, I don't think we've got any recent maternity returners, but the mental journey back from having your child can be a trip. And so I've put some tips and some advice there and some links to questionnaires that maternity returners who are worried about their mental health, or if you're worried about the mental health of a mother, a recently become mother, a recent maternity returner, then there's a questionnaire, self-report questionnaire that can be quite helpful in discovering whether that's a chronic problem or something that is just the normal kind of baby blues. And so that's my maternity returner toolkit. And as Dina said, we're making sure that we have a richer experience rather than an odd one. It might not be so odd to have children, but you don't have to feel guilty about being torn in so many directions. the person that we are now is a richer person than before, and we've got a different skill set. We just mustn't compare ourselves to the person we were before, I think, is my tip. Any questions? And I don't know how to see people if they're asking questions, so if you could just unmute if you want to ask a question, I guess that's the best way. All right, thanks very much.
Okay, I think that means I'm up. Can you all see my screen okay? Great. Okay, so I'm not sure, I don't recognize everyone in the Zoom today, so I'm not sure how global or local our audience is. My name is Caroline Cullen. I am a Deputy Principal and Director of Student Support and Safeguarding at an international school in Lisbon. Prior to that, I've been on an interesting journey into educational leadership. I was lucky enough to be part of a team of teachers who founded a school in London in 2012, which gave me loads of really interesting opportunities to try out different things. So I've been a head of English and drama, head of curriculum and assessment, did a specialism in special educational needs and disabilities, which then was a springboard to enable me to engage in consultancy and have the privilege to work with lots of schools and local authorities developing their SEN provision. And I was a school governor for a while too. So I'm kind of trying to today amalgamate all of that experience and think about sort of personal reflections on being a woman in leadership from that journey that I've been on, I suppose. And perhaps acknowledging a little bit the limitations of that as a personal experience, because I am a cisgender white woman in a very privileged position. And I think it's important to recognize that in a space like this where intersectionality is so important. And when we're talking about intersectionality as women in leadership, I think we are bound to look at this little pie chart here, which is fairly recent bit of research from Alejandra Nera at CIS about the gender of heads of school, which basically shows us that as a woman, you have a 1 in 4 chance of gaining a position as a head teacher. And as Georgie said a few minutes ago, 70% of women are teachers, so we're nowhere near representative in terms of women actually taking up leadership positions in schools, which is fairly shocking, but not as shocking as the stats when it comes to race and ethnicity. Because 74% of school leaders, who of course are mostly men, are white. And so there's something interesting for us to think about there. That's obviously not yet good enough. And I think we need to think about it in 2 different ways. We need to think about it as individuals. I think that the concept of leaning in proposed by Sheryl Sandberg is somewhat problematic because it sort of endorses the idea that we need to lean into a world that is not really designed with women in mind, rather than reshaping the world. But within the, with a pragmatic lens, that is something we do have to think about as individuals. But also many of us in this conversation today are already coming to this discussion from a position of leadership in education. And so we have the unique responsibility, I suppose, to and ownership of opportunities to shape the structures and support more women and more women of color, particularly, to have access to leadership in education. And when we talk about access, we can't talk about that without talking about recruitment. I've been involved in a lot of different recruitment processes as a school leader, obviously as an applicant as well. And I thought this study was really interesting. It's fairly recent meta-analysis by Fisher et al. And it was a survey of 1 million applicants for jobs and 4 million people who provided references. So it's quite a large sample size. And the top bit there is not that surprising. And I think many of us will recognize this from our own experience, that when people are writing references as part of a recruitment process, narrative references are often perpetuating biases against women, which is Not that surprising really, and it's mostly in terms of gender biased language that we find that. But I was quite shocked by the second bit, which is that when we remove the narrative element and move towards more structured qualitative reference structures, that gender bias all but disappears. So that's a pretty fascinating finding, I think, and it says a lot about what we can do as recruiters and as applicants to try and address that inequality in access to leadership positions. So as a recruiter, I think that's quite a simple thing we can do, isn't it? We can seek structured qualitative references at the point of appointment. Or if we can't, because we don't have that level of influence in the institutions we're in, we can at least be aware of gender bias in gendered language, I should say, or a gender bias in language. I've seen examples myself where women are described as aggressive and men are described as assertive, and I'm sure we all have stories we can share. I can see some nodding happening there in the background. And so just being mindful of that and paying attention to that, I think, is really helpful. As an applicant, I've seen hundreds of CVs in different roles, and one thing that I've observed is that women have a tendency to emphasize our soft skills, which, you know, we know that's really important, and if we're honest, collaboration and teamwork and all of these things are crucial to the effective functioning of schools. But we do also need to be mindful that if other parts of our application, which we have less control over, like references, are going to be emphasizing those sort of more stereotypical gendered elements, that maybe we need to think about emphasizing our harder strengths at the point of application. And again, as someone who's reviewed quite a lot of CVs and covering letters, you see a lot of the same thing. And so trying to emphasize that early on, your first paragraph, you want to be a paragraph with a bit of oomph, and you want to be emphasizing results, whether that's exam results, or if you're already in a leadership position, admissions, impact on admissions. If it's a profit-making school, obviously, ways in which you might be able to have an impact on the financial profile of the school is quite important. Or even if it's just ways that you've led and developed teams, something about that harder impact and what you will bring to an organization, I think is something we could all possibly do a little bit more of at the point of application. And also, I think recognizing that our relationships with the people who will ultimately be our referees, even if we're not actually at a position where we're applying for something now, is that relationship is really important. And you can have open conversations about the kinds of roles that you're applying for and the kinds of skills that you want to emphasize, and manage those conversations. Lots of reference calls now, they are calls, they take place by phone. And so there's space there for your referee to emphasize the things that you want emphasized. And so if you can build that relationship and have those conversations, that can be really powerful, I think. Of course, we can't talk about getting the job without thinking about what you do when you've been offered it, and salary, which I know is a hot topic. I was reading a really interesting meta study, which I haven't quoted here actually, but it was about the inevitable fact that gender and race do affect how we're perceived when we ask for salary negotiations to take place. So asking for a greater salary than we're offered, inevitably we're already viewed, and this applies even more so if you're not white, but we're already viewed as more aggressive and entitled than our male counterparts. So we do need to be mindful of that. But I did see this very interesting, again, relatively recent piece of work by the Pew Research Center. And it's an American study, so it's not global, and it's also across industries. It's not specific to education, but I think it still has relevance, which is that 30% of people don't actually try to negotiate a salary increase at the point of employment. But if they do, 2/3 of them are successful in achieving something of what they've asked for. And I think that's pretty remarkable, really. So you might not get everything that you've asked for, but you will, the odds are in your favor that something will come your way. So it's worth asking is the key message there. You might want to think about how you ask, but the asking is really important. In terms of what that process looks like, I think one of the things that I've noticed is many schools don't publish salary ranges. And as people involved in recruitment, actually, that's one of the things we could do to give more knowledge to women even just about what pay ranges we should be looking at, which would then support us in accessing more equitable pay, because of course there is a significant gender pay gap, which we're all aware of. But also, often at the point of employment, we ask people what their prior salary is. And of course, the only thing we're going to do with that information is perpetuate existing bias in the system. And so obviously that's in the interest of schools, but it's not in the interest of women. So let's think about that as people who have positions of leadership, and try to be mindful about the biases that we're already perpetuating. And even in those conversations, when we're having salary discussions with women, mindful of the kind of implicit biases we might have that might be shaping our reactions there. As an applicant, one thing I often think about, because people are inevitably asked what your expected range is, people think about their expected range and then propose an offer at the lower end of that range. Don't do that. Don't argue against yourself. Find a range that you're comfortable with and argue at the top of that range. And if you're argued down, well, at least you've got something within the range that's still acceptable to you. Don't start with a low offer. That's something many, many women do and then express regret about afterwards. And also think about other types of rewards, because schools do have budgetary constraints when it comes to salary. You might not be able to step outside of a particular salary bracket. You know, there are pressures in terms of making sure that people's salaries are commensurate with each other and so on. But you could think about things like, as colleagues have mentioned already, flexible working arrangements. That could be part of the negotiation process at the point of recruitment. You could think about school places for children. Schools will have their own policies on that. Maybe there's a policy where you get, I don't know, 2 school places, but you've got 3 kids. Maybe that's something you could try and build in. Or maybe you could think about CPD. You know, maybe there's a course that you really want to do that's quite expensive. Try and build that in at the point of appointment. And that's, of course, a different kind of benefit. But if you do manage to negotiate benefits in kind, then get it written into your contract, because leadership teams in schools are transient and you want to make sure that that's nailed down if you're there longer than they are. When you're in, then, I suppose, is the next part, which is how do you maintain success as a school leader? And when I was thinking about my personal reflections on this, I was thinking about how often we talk about the value of listening. And I mean, no one could deny the importance of listening, but maybe when it comes to encouraging the voices of women to be heard, we need to talk a bit more about speaking. And when I first started out, this was something I found really hard, which I obviously don't find very hard now because I'm quite happy to present at this. But in the beginning, I found it really hard to just put myself out there and put myself forward. And the easiest thing I found was getting an item onto meeting agendas where I was something of a specialist or an expert, or like a topic I felt really confident about, and getting it put at the top of the agenda. Because if it's early on, then you get to speak first. And I have found in my experience that it's easier to speak at the beginning and sort of present rather than try and respond and chime in when other people have already expressed ideas that you have to respond to. Especially if you're not very confident starting out on your leadership journey. That's been something that's been really helpful to me. And thinking about not going into a space where you're presenting ideas cold, but thinking about change management approaches. So I'm a huge fan of Cotter and his idea about building a guiding coalition. So drip feeding those ideas with colleagues, building support before you ever get into the meeting room, so that you have those that broad base of support for your ideas before you ever get to the point of presenting, and you're just way more likely to be successful. And then that's going to help you to continue on a trajectory of success and build your confidence, or as Adele said earlier, your self-worth, your self-regard as a school leader. So take time to celebrate that success and take the credit for your own success. But also, once you've got that, use that to build other people up. Because I suppose a final sobering takeaway for me when I think about my experience and stories I hear from other people is that sometimes the barrier to women comes from other women. And so that's something, again, I'm seeing a lot of nodding here. That's something I think we should all be really mindful of. And it's part of the whole point of this community. I know that Dina in a moment is going to speak about pledges that we can make as part of this community. So maybe that's where we should pause there and think about how we can support each other on our leadership journeys in education. And before I hand over to Dina, let's just see if anyone has any questions, comments, anything you'd like to share. I'd be happy to hear. Adele.
Great presentation, Caroline. Can I just ask you more about the hard skills that you mentioned? You know, you said like putting that on your resume. Are there any other things that we could focus on, you know, with regards to hard skills?
I think it's about, well, it's probably about knowing the organization that you're applying to first and what's meaningful and important to them. You know, I mentioned profit-making schools are going to inevitably, that's going to be something that needs to be a consideration at the point of application. But I think it's probably important to all schools, but less important perhaps to some schools than others. One thing I think about, to be brutally honest, it can be quite boring reading CVs. I read a lot of CVs and covering letters and they're all the same. It's just the same thing, but I'm a team player, you know, I'm dedicated to the kids, well, like we all are. So finding the thing that makes you different and, you know, what's the special thing that you will bring that someone else brilliant won't bring, because also, when we're talking about leadership positions, we're talking about, you know, operating at a high level of competitiveness there. So you want to think about what it is that you have as characteristics, projects that you've run that have had an impact. You know, if you've run, because we know each other already, and I know about, for example, peer mentoring that you're involved in, thinking about schemes like that you've run and what the impact has been on student behavior or attendance or exam results or whatever it is. So being able to identify projects or initiatives that you've led on and then explore what the impact of those has been. Don't leave out the bit about impact, because that's the bit that's really important, I think, would be my...
So like data information really as much
Yeah.
as you can. Got it. Thank you, Caroline.
I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything you'd like to ask or share? No? Okay, great. Well, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. It's lovely to see you all. And I will hand over to Dina.
Hello. All right. Thank you so much to all our speakers. We're going to now have some breakout rooms. What we'd love for you to do is take the opportunity to introduce yourself to I think it's going to be a small group, and hopefully meet some new people and share what your key takeaways were. I've got a billion written on paper here, so trying to narrow it down might be tricky, but enjoy kind of meeting each other and having a chat with some new people. I think we just about got everyone back. All right. So the last thing, I hope you had a nice time getting to meet some of the people, other women in our community. And the last thing I wanted to just talk about was further kind of building our community and facilitating more regular connections. So we do have another event scheduled for the end of the academic year. So that'll be kind of around June time, and we'll be in touch about that closer time and to get your input for what you'd like that to look like. But before we get there, we really want to kind of be having more connections with you ourselves, but also facilitate them between you. And Georgie mentioned about having the maternity leavers WhatsApp group within our community. One of the other ones that we wanted to propose was a weekend reading. So somebody putting in kind of a really great article to kind of get your teeth into and maybe share a few kind of thoughts about that particular article. And also maybe having a group where you can go for career advice and mentoring to do with something. It could be to do with swapping jobs, it could be to do with a role change at school, or maybe just a challenging situation that you'd like some advice about. So what would be great is if one of these three groups would appeal to you, if you could write that in the chat now, or if you've got an idea for a different group that you would maybe like to lead or be part on, then put that out there as well. All right. Well, thank you very much. Before we get timed out, I wanted the opportunity to say a huge thank you for coming to this event. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you so much again to all our speakers. And yeah, we'll stay in touch and hope to see you all soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.